As of 2025, over 2.8 million people identify as being transgender or non binary in the United States. And I'll be honest, I think that's really cool. As someone who identifies as non binary myself, watching these statistics slowly rise in accordance with increased rates of acceptance has been a source of joy that's kept me going over the years. Even so, these groups are still subject to disproportionate scrutiny and discrimination compared to their cisgender counterparts, which has led to trans and non binary individuals having amongst the highest rates of mental health struggles and suicidality in the entire country. With these issues, it seems almost ridiculous not to wonder, how do trans and non binary individuals deal with discrimination, not just on an individual scale, but as a community of people under the same umbrella of marginalization?
So, in order to examine how transgender and non-binary, or T&B, people respond to discrimination, it's necessary that I define what I'm actually referring to when I refer to discrimination against T&B individuals. Of course, transpho- transphobia, specifically that from those who are cisgender, is the most visible form of conflict relating to trans people. It is the thing that I imagine cis people, regardless of allyship status, are most likely to be aware of. Some of the more public conflicts stemming from this issue tend to relate to uncivil discussion concerning whether being transgender is a valid identity. And now more than ever, these attacks have been bleeding into legislative debates and policymaking as T&B people have been desperately trying to maintain what few rights we've been granted over the years. However, there is a second, less examined facet of discrimination that I wish to mention in this essay, that being the practice of respectability politics within LGBT plus spaces. Although it is highly important in most discussions of trans identity, I don't actually intend to talk about transphobic cis people any more than is warranted for discussing the ways that T&B individuals react to their actions and words. On the other hand, respectability politics are a special case due to being a far more insular issue than most forms of transphobia. In other words, respectability politics aren't imposed upon T&B people by outside groups, for the most part, but are instead something that we do or do not engage in amongst each other. I suppose I should actually define the term then. Respectability politics is a term now used amongst various marginalized groups, but was historically used within Black communities to refer to how certain members of their communities appealed to hegemonic society by positioning themselves as the good ones, respectable individuals who conform to the status quo in hopes of avoiding the worst of the discrimination that their peers are forced to endure. The main source of tension regarding these actions is in the way that these people often insist others who share in their marginalization that the only way to ensure safety and comfortability in wider society is through respectability, disparaging those who forgo respectability to embrace the unique aspects of their identities with arguments that they're making us look bad or are not not representative of the group as a whole, even going so far as to punch down on their peers alongside their oppressors in a futile hope that they won't be the next on the chopping block.
So, throughout all of my research, there are three interconnected factors that have consistently cropped up in every article, paper, and study that I've come across when it comes to improving and maintaining the mental well being of TNB individuals: gender expression, identity exploration, and community support. I believe that a good place to start would be a discussion of a rather niche subset of non binary identities referred to as xenogenders. Despite having only been around for about a decade or so, xenogenders serve as an interesting case when it comes to examining the ways that T&B people have stretched the bounds of gender into a more charitable, not to mention practical, configuration for the benefit of one another. So, xenogenders are a category of non binary gender identity that aren't solely describable by human definitions of what gender is, such as masculinity, femininity, or even androgyny. Instead, xenogenders are expressed in relation to non human ideas, ranging from tangible things such as animals, natural phenomena, and celestial bodies, to more abstract concepts such as colors, emotions, and aesthetics. Furthermore, these are often accompanied by the adoption of neopronouns, a similarly unrestricted means of reframing one's identity through the adoption of non standard personal pronouns outside of those commonly used in cis-normative society. For example, pronoun sets such as it, its, sie, zer, fey, fair would fall under this category. By engaging in gender in such a loose and unrestricted fashion, xenogender individuals directly challenge the rules of what gender is and isn't allowed to be, as established by our cis-normative society. These small actions of radical self expression allow non binary individuals to reclaim the concept of gender in its entirety, molding what once was a tool of societal stratification and restrictive ideas into a sandbox in which one can form any identity one likes so long as it fulfills your personal needs. However, despite xenogenders being a genuine, if somewhat lighthearted, way to express one's gender, their relatively recent emergence and extreme divergence from hegemonic notions of gender has resulted in them being a common target for criticism and harassment from both cisgender individuals as well as those who engage in respectability politics. To be honest, while trying to do research on xenogenders for this project, I had difficulty finding sources unwilling to dismiss the idea of xenogenders as some frivolous notion invented by children too young to grasp the ideas they're playing with. A silly idea that could only exist in the minds of those completely detached from reality. And yet, in spite of the massive amounts of negativity that those with xenogenders face, they have managed to persist on account of their effectiveness in fostering community and the immense meaning that they have in people's lives. If that's not proof enough of their usefulness in fostering resilience against discrimination, then I don't know what is.
With that in mind, the next subject I want to talk about is identity exploration, or the means by which TMB people become associated with one another in the first place. While gender exploration is a topic that gets somewhat close to the idea of gender expression, I believe there is enough distinction between them to justify separating them into their own sections. In particular, identity exploration is distinct in its relation to its involvement in the exploration of one's identity and the formation of connections with people who share your identity. In regards to identity exploration, a good place to start would be the relationship between TNB groups and the internet. Unlike reality, in which identity exploration can be fairly difficult as a result of having to directly interact with people in a way that is inseparable from the identities that you previously held, the internet allows for people to act anonymously with no connection to their real life identity. Because of this, many TMB individuals, including myself, first began exploring their genders online, allowing them to be accepted for their identity in spaces filled with like-minded individuals while getting a feel for what it's like to live as themselves. In a study published in the Journal of College Student Development on the identity exploration of TNB college students, it was noted that participants learned that other gender identities and possibilities existed for them through the internet. Rather than feeling alone in their assigned genders, they found new terms and concepts that better fit their internal understandings of themselves. If not for the internet, I'm certain that both myself and many others would have never gained such an extensive understanding of our own identities, and for that I am nothing but grateful.
While gender expression and identity exploration may be related to one's individual identity, it's important to acknowledge the role that TNB communities have played in allowing such activities to flourish in the face of widespread prejudice and discrimination. In particular, one of the most compelling and useful community activities for TNB people has been group-oriented political action. However, while I would definitely be able to talk about the actual political aspect of the subject, I feel like I'm far better equipped to discuss the far less discussed subject of how political participation actually affects TNB individuals. To start off with, I'd like to talk about how TNB people get involved in political action in the first place. Well, it seems intuitive that simply valuing one's identity as a TNB individual would lead to higher rates of involvement in political action in order to improve the lives of both yourself and those who share your identity. This may not be the case in practice. As Gallagher et al. Write in their 2025 paper, personal connections to TNB individuals, rather than the sole act of identification as being TNB, are the main factor in determining active political participation in favor of the rights of TNB individuals. This held true in their study not just for TNB groups, but for cisgender individuals as well, a detail that really stood out to me upon reading through the paper. Furthermore, there is additional research to suggest that involvement in these groups may have additional benefits to mental health for TNB people outside of the direct results of the work that they engage in. According to a study conducted in 2022, active political participation positively correlated with increased resilience against discrimination and mental health outcomes amongst TNB individuals. While the study doesn't go in depth as to potential reasons for this particular finding, I imagine that it has to do with the social aspects of political action, such as the formation of community and social networks, along with the knowledge that the actions you're taking directly serve your community and are genuinely making a difference for those you care about most.
In the end, community support, along with gender expression and exploration, all serve the important purpose of allowing for TNB people to thrive even in the face of the immense discrimination we face throughout our lives. To finally give an answer to my central question, I'd have to say that regardless of the way that we as trans and non binary folks choose to go about our lives, we can't survive without each other. By supporting each other through difficult times, we're able to greatly improve all of our lives. For if we can't have each other, then all we'll be left with is nothing. Stay safe out there, and have a good day.